unto God a new song. Sing unto God, and we'll all sing along. All the earth a new song to God. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Sing unto God a new song, all the earth sing along. Shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. One more time. Shiru, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. Sing unto God, sing unto God, all the earth a new song. I will sing unto God a new song. Sing unto God, and we'll all sing along. All the earth unto God a new song. Shiru, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Tonight, we have the pleasure of welcoming Rabbi Josh Weinberg, Vice President of the URJ for Israel and Reform Zionism, and he's also the Executive Director of the American Reform Zionist Association, ARTZA, as our guest speaker. The decision this week by the Israeli Supreme Court to recognize non-Orthodox conversions in Israel is certainly a cause for celebration. So we look forward to hearing Rabbi Weinberg's reflections later on in our service on this development as well as the state of Israel in general. This Shabbat is also Refugee Shabbat, a project of HIAS, founded as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. HIAS now works on behalf of refugees, no matter who they are, no matter where they are. Given the role played by refugees in building the modern state of Israel, it seems fitting to be hearing about Israel on the same evening when we reflect on the continued plight of refugees and asylum seekers. We are wise to remember two things. One is that Israel is still, to this day, a home to refugees. And the other is that not so long ago, we too were seekers of a new and safe place to call home. We continue with Yedid Nefesh on page 128.
Yedid nefesh av harachaman, av harachaman. Me'yashol chavdecha eretzonecha עבדך כמו אייל ישתחווה אל מול הדרך. ידיד נפש אף הרחמן, אף הרחמן משכבתך רצונך, רצונך.
We continue our welcome of Shabbat by joining together for Lecha Dodi on page 138. We will join together for verses 1, 2, 5, and 9. And as we begin verse 9, I invite you to rise and face the entrance to whatever space you are in as we symbolically welcome Shabbat into our homes.
Get the maracas. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad yishmi'anu el hamiuchad Adonai echad u'shmo echad M'shemu tiferet v'li tehila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'necha ki bekor haberacha merosh mikedem nesucha sof maaseh b'machshava techila. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat itoreri, itoreri ki va'orek umi uri, uri, uri shitaberi kevod Adonai alayich nikla. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret bala gam b'simcha uv'sola toch emunei am segula. Boi chala, boi chala. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela.
We welcome Shabbat with two candles, one to remember Shabbat and one to make it holy through our observance. We remember Shabbat by linking ourselves to those who came before us, a people who time and time again were forced to leave home in order to practice Judaism openly and freely. We observe Shabbat by creating sacred space in our homes, in our synagogues, in all the places that give us refuge, so that we may welcome newcomers to our communities, helping them to settle into new lives with ease. The flickering of these lights reminds us of the divine spark that is within each of us, all of us equally deserving of dignity and respect, no matter who we are, what we look like, what we believe, or where we call home. We continue on page 120, and as we light the Shabbat candles, if there was something that brought light into your life this week, I invite you to share that in the chat box.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu shel Shabbat.
Page 144, Chatzi Kaddish.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbi Be'olemo divrach chirutei V'yomlech malchutei B'chayechon u'vyomechon U'v'chayedchol beit Yisrael Ba'gala, ba'gala U'vizman kariv V'immeru Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevorach le'olam olol me'olmaya yitbarach. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei tekutsha richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma v'immeru Amen.
Please rise.
Barechu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach la'olam va'ed.
We pray together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'dvaro ma'ariv aravim, b'chokhma poteach she'arim, uv'tvuna mishane itim, u'machalif et hazmanim, u'mesader et hakochavim, b'mishmerotehem harakia kirtzono. Borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, וחושך מפני אור. הוא מעביר יום ומביא לילה, הוא מבדיל בין יום ובין לילה. אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, המעריב ערבים.
אהבת עולם, בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, עמך אהבת. תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכבנו ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם בלילה, נגה יומם בלילה. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
May be seated.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
6 years ago, Alyssa Berger sat in my office as we discuss the Syrian refugee crisis. And like we have just chanted, she wanted to teach to her children that they could do something. And so Alyssa and Jenny Tenenbaum started our refugee program that blossomed into the Westfield Fun Club, which we housed in our building up until COVID struck. So on this refugee Shabbat, we wanted to hear a little bit about what is happening with the refugees that we have partnered with. And so I turn it over to Jenny to share some words.
Since we had to shut down our in-person Saturday morning fun club activities. March 7th, 2020 was our last day. And even though we all felt a sense of uncertainty that morning, together with our volunteers, we still welcomed our families, and the second floor classrooms were filled with music and laughter as the adults worked on their ESL and the kids did their homework and made art projects and sang in music class. That morning, like all of you, we didn't have any real idea that the next 12 months would be filled with such fear and heartbreak, sadness and isolation. And yet for me, and I know I speak for my Westfield Fun Club partner, Alyssa Berger, this past year has also been defined by inspiration and heart, community and generosity. Even as each of us personally struggled, as soon as Alyssa and I realized that our refugee families were facing severe food insecurity, our community, friends and strangers alike, jumped into action. Starting March 14th, 1 week after the shutdown, the Westfield Fun Club began delivering weekly food and essential supplies to families in need. That first week, we provided assistance to about a dozen families. Within the month, we were delivering to over 50 families. And by the end of April, it had tripled to over 150 families. And this was all possible due to the incredible outpouring of support from our Temple Emanu-El congregation and our greater Westfield community and from people around the country. And this, to me, is what will forever define the pandemic. It will never erase the inconceivable amount of loss our country has suffered, but the way in which people who were themselves struggling, the way in which they stepped up to help another human being is what I choose to remember. We started the Westfield Fun Club in 2016 to help create a lasting foundation for success for recent arrivals to the United States. Alyssa and I believe this is one of the basic precepts of both our country and our Jewish religion, to welcome the stranger in our land. And even in spite of the pandemic that has taken so much from us, the Westfield Fun Club, because of our volunteers and our donors, has continued its mission to help our new families create a lasting foundation for success. We may have pivoted from ESL and karate and art to food and diapers and shampoo, but this has still all been integral to creating that foundation. And just this past week, in the midst of the ongoing pandemic, we saw that this foundation is indeed strong. Alyssa and I received a text from one of our refugee men. He is actually the dad of the very first family we worked with back in 2016. The text was simply a picture, no words, a picture of him at his citizenship swearing-in ceremony. And on his Facebook page, he posted the same picture with the words, "Today is a big holiday. I have acquired American citizenship. All thanks to my Jewish friends for their support in my learning. God bless America." This is what I will remember about the pandemic. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you to all of our volunteers. Let us continue to work for the day when nations will be one and at peace. Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea.
Yam bye bye bim bim bam, yam bye bye bim bam, yam bye bye bim bim bam, yam bye bye bim bam, I die 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 die, yam bye bye bim bim bam. I da 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 da. Yabba ba bim bam. Mi chamocha baili Madonai. Mi chamocha gedar bakodesh. Norati Lord, oh sefelle. Norati Lord, oh sefelle. Mahalechutecha rauvanecha. Bokeyayam lifnei Moshe. Ze anu veyameru. Adonai imloch leolam ba'ed. Yam bai ba bim bim bam. Yam bai ba bim bam. Yam bai ba bim bim bam. Yam bai ba bim bam. I da 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 da. Yam bai ba bim bam. I da 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 da. Yam bai ba bim bam.
We continue our service on page 162 as we sing a song for Shabbat, Vishamru.
Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam B'nit olam B'ni uvin b'nei Yisrael Oti la'olam Sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz uvayom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash shavat vayinafash oti la'olam oti la'olam.
Pray as if everything depended on God. Act as if everything depended on you. We rise for the Amidah.
Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi agiti latecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, U'mevii geula livnei v'neihem, Lema'an shemo b'ahava, Melech chozer u'Moshiach u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Vezrat Sarah, Atah gibor la'olam Adonai, Mechaye hakol atarav lehoshia, Mashiv haruach u'morit hagashem, Mechakel chayim bechesed, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. בי כמוך בעל גבורות ומיתו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
We continue silently using the words in our prayer book or the words of our hearts. We'll join together on page 178 with the words of Shalom Rav. When you're done praying, I invite you to be seated.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Laolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Laolam. Ki atahu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki atahu melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Laolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Laolam. V'tov b'necha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Laolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Laolam. Tasim Laolam. Tasim
During our silent prayer, our thoughts and our prayers may have turned to a loved one or a close friend that needs a little bit of extra healing of mind, body, or spirit. If you are remembering someone this evening, I invite you to share their name in our chat box as we remember those in our community. Gabby Kraft-Buckman, Susan Klein, Susan Summer Curter, Arlene Furman, Neil Silverman, Mason Rockmore, Martin Ostroff, Pearl Weitzman, Aaron Taylor, Terry Shellman, Sharon Neese, Rabbi Rob Nasenchuk, Andy Scatorius Diori, Joyce Kagan, Gloria Ostracher, Ina Bavevel Draymond, Kathy Murphy, Betsy Miller, Mary Ann Stahl, Allison Tischler, Stephen Brundage, Betty Moore, Madison Mosher, Phyllis Brown, Stephen Wasser, Elaine Michaels, Melissa Baer, Zev Fischel Ben Shaw Labe, Lenore Anita Engel, David Lazar, Amy Lederer Shapiro, Marvin Broth, Rosalie Elbaum, Elaine Morgenthau, Carol Siegel, Stephen Anthony Susak, Benjamin Kagan, Lori Wasserman, Rosalie Lee Landau, Michelle Shmuel, Rita Hooker, Sharon Schaupow, William Dabinet, Nancy Foucault, Jonathan Shemesh. Mishaberach, Avotenu v'imotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, hu yivarech et ha-cholim. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless those who are ill. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit. And together let us say, Amen. We now turn to the words of Kiddush, sanctifying the holiness of this Shabbat. I invite you to rise and turn to page 123.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu. Zikaron lema'ase v'reishit, ki hu yom techila lemikra'e kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim, ki vanu v'charta ve'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, ve'shabbat kodshecha be'ava uvratzon hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Amen. L'chaim.
Please be seated. My deep connection to the state of Israel began in 2005. I had traveled to Israel many times, both in high school and with my family. But not until that summer did I really connect with Israel, for more than the falafel and the Tel Aviv beaches. In the summer of 2005, I was a madrik for Nifty in Israel. I had the chance to take high school students around the country, exploring the cities, the nature, the history, and the people of the land. That same summer is when I met Josh Weinberg, not yet a rabbi. He was also leading a group of students for Nifty in Israel, and he was the lead educator. During our staff orientation, I remember Josh getting up on that ancient wall of the old city and speaking about the importance of the place that we were standing, but that we should also not only connect with the ancient wall, but also with the vibrancy of the land, a place as Reformed Jews we should call home. He was a captivating educator, and when he spoke to the entire staff, we listened, as did the high school students that summer too, which is a hard thing to do. He brought Israeli history alive and shared his love of the land and fostered it for those who traveled with him that summer. Now, 16 years later, Rabbi Josh Weinberg is leading our Reform movement as the Vice President of the URJ for Israel and Reform Zionism, and as the Executive Director of the American Reform Zionist Association. And we are so incredibly lucky that he is. Rabbi Weinberg is strengthening our ties and other Reform congregations' ties with the Jewish state. He is fighting for our Reform Jewish ideals in the land and continuing to build that love for our country, for that country. We are so lucky to have Rabbi Josh Weinberg join us this Shabbat to teach us, to challenge us, to deepen our ties to the land of Israel.
It is good to know that someone was listening all those years ago, and it is remarkable to see your journey, and I don't have to tell your congregation how lucky they are to have you as their rabbi and as their leader, and to take them now into the future. But I will anyway, and that, Ethan, it is so wonderful to see you and to see how you've grown and are now inspiring the next generation of young Reformed Jews, not only in Westfield, but beyond that too. And it is such a pleasure to be here. Your congregation is one of these mythic, legendary congregations of our movement. And as I look across, of course, my good friends, Rabbi Appel, and so nice to be with Cantor Novick. I'm looking out at the Zoom of Rabbi Chuck and Terry Kroloff, who are here, who are one of the giants of our movement, and my good friends who have so many connections here. So people have known me since I was born, like Rabbi Ellen Lewis, of course, and Jeff Kagan is here with us. And I would just say that what Rabbi Prosnitz said was true, but I would not be where I am today if it weren't for, of course, Rabbi Bennett Miller, who is my mentor and my teacher and my friend. And I'm so lucky that you got to learn some of his Torah over the past year or so, and to share with his outlook and his passion for the Jewish people and for Israel and Zionism. And I want to thank all of you also, because Emanu-El has been one of Artsa's largest supporters for so many years now. And those of you who are members, those of you, how many of you voted in the World Zionist Congress elections? Just show of hands this past year. We could not have done it without you. And what we're going to speak about in just a few minutes, we're going to still need your involvement and your constant action and activity. And I'm so glad to be with you tonight at this, what we call Shabbat Para, when we read tomorrow the story of the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, and explore that chapter in our history. But I want to say something that might be obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. I want to posit that the state of Israel, now almost 73 years old, has been a tremendous success story. It's a story that goes beyond, a Hollywood movie, beyond our wildest dreams, to imagine what we have been able to create against the odds that we faced in almost 130 years of Zionism, and then 73 years since we've had our own state, has been nothing short of miraculous. That doesn't mean that we haven't made our fair share of mistakes. As you may or may not be aware, when David Ben-Gurion and his ilk and the other early pioneers and early Zionist leaders went to declare establishment of the state of Israel, there was no book on the shelf that they could take off that said how to build a Jewish state for dummies. And so we did the best that we could, and not only did we join in with this pioneering spirit where we said, we came to this land, Anu banu arza livnot, to build the land, ulihibanot ba, that we also came to be built in. And that we've seen not only was building the state of Israel, the modern Jewish state, a project of the entire Jewish people the world around, the state of Israel has now been shaping and forming and creating what Judaism and Jewish life is as we know it today. And so as we approach Israel's 73rd year of independence, there are a few questions that still remain as part of the defining character. Namely, what does it actually mean to have a Jewish state? What does it mean to be Jewish in the Jewish state? The question that we still have not yet quite agreed upon the answer, as Rabbi Appel mentioned in welcoming us all together at the beginning of Shabbat services tonight, is who is, if Israel's going to be a Jewish state, then who is a Jew? And more even importantly, who has the authority to determine who is a Jew? That's why this week's landmark Supreme Court ruling was so incredibly meaningful. Now, some people are cynics and they say, well, look, what's the big deal? It actually only affected 10 court petitions or about 30 or 40 people who are waiting in limbo to have their conversions recognized so that they can claim citizenship in the Jewish state. But I'd like to suggest that this is a significant moment for us. This ruling that the Supreme Court said, no, you as a Jewish state, the state of Israel, has to recognize the conversions of Reform rabbis, of conservative rabbis, and other non-Orthodox rabbis. I'd like to maintain that this is a major step in chipping away at the unbridled authority that the ultra-Orthodox chief rabbinate holds. That this is a moment where one could even say that this is the beginning of a revolution. Now, this ruling did not come overnight. You may have read, you may have heard that these court petitions have been going on for over 15 years. But even before that, this is the same struggle that Rabbi Kroloff and Rabbi Eric Yaffe were fighting in the 1970s when they created Arza, the 1980s and 90s when they won significant victories. For instance, the ability for Reform and conservative conversions to be recognized from abroad, from the United States, from all over the world. And I want to say that this victory, as we celebrate this week, we are standing on their shoulders. But you see, Zionism is bigger than any single issue. And I want to take a moment to share with you a little bit of my own personal reflections, because my own Zionism had very little to do with the struggle for religious equality or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was about the dream of fulfilling our national aspirations. It was the dream of reclaiming our ancient homeland and restoring a sense of self-determination. And for me, as a young Reform Jew growing up, I grew up just west of Westfield, New Jersey, in a small town called Chicago. And I was a seeker. I was looking for different options, and I realized that for me, that Zionism was actually the answer to my Jewish identity. And I showed up in Israel wanting to be a secular nationalist Jew, bushy-eyed and full of idealism and romanticism. And I said, okay, I'm here to drain the swamps and to work the land. And my friends laughed at me and they said, that's great, but you're about 100 years too late. said, okay, so what is Zionism today? What's going to be my expression? Is it enough just to come and live in the land of Israel, or to work trying to inspire young teenagers as Rabbi Prozin and I did together? And the search went on. And fortunately for me, well, maybe you're familiar with this concept. Have you ever heard of a rabbi or a member of the clergy claiming that they received their calling? You're familiar with the concept? A little bit? Yeah, okay, great. Well, fortunately for me, mine came in the form of an actual phone call, which is convenient, okay? We have to recognize those modern miracles when they call you on the telephone. And it was a friend of mine on the other line who said to me, he was a conservative rabbi and a good friend, and he said, listen, it says, what are you doing? I said, doing about what? And he said, what are you doing in life? I said, what? I'm teaching young Jewish teenagers on our Movement's High School in Israel program, which, by the way, you should all send your kids and grandkids on 100%. Send them for a semester in Israel in high school, very important. And remember, Israelis are sometimes cynical, and he said to me, he said, look, that's very nice that you're spending your days teaching affluent kids from the suburbs in America. I said, but I want you to try working with real Israelis. I said, oh, what do you have in mind? He said, all right, come with me this Shabbat. I said, okay. And I packed a bag he picked me up, and we started driving south from Jerusalem, and we arrived at the town of Kiryat Gat. Now, it's not on the standard Israel tour trip that many of you might have been in. How many of you have been to Israel before? How many of you have spent considerable time there? Anyone? Any what I call repeat offenders? You go often, and as we like to say, it's not galut if you commute. And obviously many of us are eagerly awaiting that moment when we can rejoin and retravel again to go back to Israel after more than a year for some of us. And so we show up in this town, which was a dusty, what we call a development town, which was halfway between Tel Aviv and the middle of nowhere. And we arrived at the campus of a boarding school. He said, look, I've been working here, a few Shabbats a month, a few Shabbatot a month, and I want you to help me. I want you to be what they call the Shabbat guy here. I said, what? You want me to be the Shabbos guy? And he said, no. You're the Shabbat guy. You come, you lead services, you do activities with the kids here, and you're like a positive Jewish role model for them. I said, okay, I had been a camp counselor long enough. I said, oh, okay, I can try that. He said, okay, good, you're on. And kind of pushed me out of the car and said, okay, great, Shabbat Shalom. And I go get ready, and I make my way to the makeshift Beit Knesset, the synagogue, which was a prefabricated building that in Hebrew you would call a caravan, sort of a small rectangular building. And I see the students filing in, getting ready for Friday night services, and I happened to notice 2 10 or 11-year-old kids breaking out into a fist fight over, it turns out later, was over who would have the honor of passing out the siburim. Yikes. And so I was approached by one of their madrichim, one of their counselors came to welcome me, and he said, oh, you're the new Shabbat guy. And we began to talk for a few minutes, and he said, well, tell me something, is that a slight American accent that I hear in your Hebrew? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I just made Aliyah about 3 years ago here, and I grew up in the States and came to Israel. And usually when you say that to Israelis, they either say one of two or sometimes both things. They either say, that's wonderful, welcome, or what's the matter with you, are you crazy? Or sometimes both. But he just paused and he looked at me and he said, yeah, no, that's not going to work here. These kids are going to eat you alive. I said, well, thank you. Uh-oh. And he said, but don't worry, I'm going to help you. He said, I'm gonna teach you a song here that we are the only group, we are the only school, the only institution in the entire state of Israel, in the entire country that sings this song. And if you can sing this song, well, they'll think you're one of us and you'll come with, they'll go with you. I said, oh, thank goodness for this guy. And he said, we don't have a lot of time, hurry up. And it goes like this. He takes me around the corner and he goes, all right, listen. And he begins to sing. Shalom Rav, Yisrael Am. And I started to laugh. He said, what? You know that song? I said, of course, let me tell you, I was the head song leader at Olin St. Ruby Union Institute in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin in the United States at my URJ camp. And he says, I don't know what that is. I said, let me tell you something. I grew up just 2 miles away from Cantor Jeff Klepper, and I just saw Rabbi Dan Freelander here in Israel last week, and he goes, who the hell are they? And I said, oh, they're the guys who wrote the song. Now, how many of you have ever met Israelis before? Okay. What is the worst thing for an Israeli to be? It's what we call in Hebrew a friar or a sucker. He said, if some cantor in America told you that they wrote that song, the song is actually right here in the Siddur, in the prayer book. I said, no, of course, right, I know that. They wrote the melody. He goes, okay, doesn't he? Goes, can you sing the song? I said, yeah, I can sing all right, get in there. And he pushes me into the door, and we get through a rather painful Kabbalat Shabbat, if you remember the fist fight. And very much like we did together this evening, we rose for the Amidah, we prayed the Amidah together, and it was time for a few minutes of silence. And at the end of that silence, I mustered up all the courage that I could and the strength, and I closed my eyes, and I began to sing. Shalom Rav, Yisrael Am Shalom. And like magic, the students all straightened up in their seats, and they stopped pinching each other and messing with each other, and they turned and opened their Siddur, and they were following along, and they were singing and belting out this very loud, very Israeli, off-key version of the same song that I grew up with at camp, in youth group, and in synagogue. And it was at that moment that it hit me. As I looked out at this crowd of about 60 kids ages 8 to 18 who were there because their parents couldn't take care of them. They were Israelis from Ethiopia, Israelis from the former Soviet Union, Israelis from Iraq, from Yemen, from Tunisia, from all over. And they were sitting there, boys and girls together, not a given, by the way, praying out of an Orthodox Sephardic Siddur, singing a song written by a Reform cantor and rabbi. And I said, that's it. I said, you see, I'm too late to drain the swamps and work the land like the chalutzim, like the pioneers of a century ago, and I'm no good at high tech and being part of the startup nation as Israel is. And I said, this is it. This is what my Zionism is going to be now. Because while all those things are great, I can help bring Reform Judaism to Israel. I can help reimagine what it means to be Jewish in this Jewish state, because you see, Israelis are now waking up to this reality where the previous polarizing dichotomy between religious or Orthodox and secular no longer answers the needs of the mainstream. You see, Israelis are waking up and understanding that just having a Jewish state doesn't necessarily mean having a Jewish community or even a Jewish identity. I said, that is what this is all about. That is what Reform Zionism is all about, is not worrying so much about the state of the Jews, but helping to create what it actually means to have a Jewish state, to follow the values that we learn in the Torah and apply them to public life. That is the Zionist revolution, and that is what's so exciting. And when we look at it, we know that I came to the conclusion that as much as Israel very much needs Reform Judaism here very much needs Israel. And now, Rabbi Prosnett assured me, and Rabbi Miller also, that everyone at Emanu-El in Westfield reviews the weekly Torah portion at least 15 minutes each night before you go to sleep. That's true, rabbis? I think so, 100%. Great. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Torah portion, but what I want to do is think about this exact moment we are in our calendar year. Because when we talk about those values, we are right in the middle of two of our most important holidays right now. We just celebrated Purim last week, and we are now just a few weeks away from Pesach. Now, you see, Jewish history speaks to our generation in the voice of two biblical commands to remember, that word zachor. Now, the first voice is actually the voice of Pesach. And that voice commands us to remember that we were strangers in the land of Egypt. The message of that command is, don't forget that you were refugees. Don't forget what it means to be a stranger, and don't be brutal. Now that you have power, now that we have power, we must be judged in how we treat the other, how we treat the stranger in our midst, the powerless, the ger, almanav, the yatom, right? The stranger, the orphan, and the widow. However, the second voice is the voice of Purim, actually. Because remember the villain of the Purim story, Haman, who is a descendant of none other than the all-time quintessential anti-Semite, Amalek. It was Amalek who attacked us without provocation when we were wandering the desert. And that command to remember is the command to not be naive. To notice that we have to be strong. And that first command is the voice of Pesach, of liberation. And the second is of Purim, commemorating our victory over this genocidal threat. Pesach Jews are motivated by empathy with the oppressed and the powerless. Purim Jews are motivated by the awareness that no matter how strong we are, we still face existential threats. And here's the thing. Both commands, both voices are essential. One without the other creates an unbalanced Jewish personality, a distortion of Jewish history and values. We must judge ourselves if we can, as the ability to create both a Jewish and a democratic state. And if we fail in creating a democratic state, I'd like to maintain that our state cannot also be Jewish. As we take with us those messages of Purim, leading into Pesach, and looking deeply at these Jewish values of what it means to create a Jewish state, I want us to look into ourselves and ask the question, where do we see us as a part of this? Not us as American Jews, but us as individuals. How are you and everyone coming to this synagogue, to this virtual space, as I look around the squares on this Zoom, how are each and every one of us connected? Because let me tell you something, we need you. The battle that we won was absolutely a powerful victory and a major win for us. But let me share with you the sobering reality that that battle, that war is not over. In a few weeks after the coming Israeli elections, you can rest assured that we are going to see massive political extremist forces who will come together with a serious attempt to overturn that victory. That's why right now we need every single Reform Jew to join us, to become members of ARTSA, to support our movement, to support our lawyers of the Israel Religious Action Center, to support our Israel movement for reform and progressive Judaism, who's building congregations, building youth movements, changing the face of Israeli society. We need all of you to be a part of this. And I hope that you can join us on this sacred and fateful journey as we see a new light, as we say, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, v'nizkeh kulanu mehera le'oro, that this new light will shine upon Zion, and may all of us merit from it quickly in our days. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Rabbi Weinberg, for those words, that charge for us to find ourselves in this story, for us to be there, to us to support the reform movement in Israel. And that's our hope as our congregation, that we can continue to do that. You have charged us and our community to continue to strengthen our ties, and we are dedicated. In the coming weeks, we will be creating an Israel programming board at Temple Emanu-El. Please be on the lookout for information in the e-blast for our first meeting. We want to continue to have vibrant programming about Israel, about culture, about politics, and we have some really exciting events already planned. Rabbi Eric Yaffe on Friday, March 19th, will be sharing a briefing about the upcoming Israeli elections. Cantor Ott will be teaching songs from the Chalutzim. I'll be doing a course on, in conjunction with the Shalom Hartman Institute, and we will be inviting and welcoming Israeli author Neshko Navo, who is an award-winning author, in April as well. And one of the most exciting things that we can do as a congregation is to go back to Israel. So, in the summer of 2022, a year and a half from now, we will have 2 buses. That's my goal, that's my hope, that we have 2 buses from our congregation, an adult bus and a family bus, in parallel, visiting the land, visiting our brothers and sisters in Israel, celebrating Shabbat and Reform congregations across the land. I hope that you will join us in the summer of 2022. It's not too early to plan, and if you are interested, send me an email, and we would love to continue that conversation. More information will be coming out after Passover, probably in the late spring. And so we share a prayer for the state of Israel. I invite you to rise. From Anat Hoffman. My God, Eli, in this sacred moment, give us hope for Israel and her future. Renew our wonder at the miracle of the Jewish state. In the name of the pioneers who made the deserts bloom, give us the tools to cultivate a diversity of Jewish expression in Israel. In the name of our fallen soldiers, give us the courage to stand up to the words and ways of zealots, those in our own midst and those among our neighbors. In the name of Israeli inventors who have amazed the world with their inventions, help us apply the same ingenuity to finding a path to peace. In the name of all these individuals, grant us the strength to conquer doubt and despair in Israel, replacing doubt with action, replacing despair with hope. And let us say, Amen. We conclude our service on page 586 with the words of Elenu. We remain standing.
עלינו לשבח לאדון עתיד גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Please be seated. Rise up like the Son of God over all humanity. Cause light to go forth over all the lands between the seas, and light up the universe with the joy of wholeness, of freedom, and of peace.
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
We now turn our thoughts to our loved ones, whom death has recently taken from us. We recall those who have died in the last 30 days. Joyce Heitner, mother of Sharon Bryan. Naphtali Landau, father of Hilary Landau. Esther Eisdorfer, mother of Ray Eisdorfer. Edith Miller, mother of Stephen Miller. Carol Kaplan, sister of Rich Kellner. Irving Kaplan, brother-in-law of Rich Kellner. Janice Kushner, mother of Sherry Seltzer. Simon Sadowski, father of Lena Shanker. And we recall Barbara Greenspan, mother of Cindy Goldman, who has died but not yet been buried. And those whom have died at this season in years past, whose yurtzites we observe this Shabbat. Arnold Albin, Bobby Alterson, Miriam Boehm, Evelyn Blank, Sam Botos, Marilyn Bregman, Anna Burstein, Walter Cash, Sarah Cates, Robbie Charon, Alice Cohen, Harry Deitch, Fred David, Cecilia Eisner, Jonathan Epstein, Jerome Fechner, Etta Fagenbaum, Mary Feynman, Bernard Feldman, Shirley Frankel, Anna Frost, Stephanie Lou Garfield, Alfred Gelfand, Leo Gerson, Minerva Gerstein, Barry Gilman, Samuel Gilman, Marianne Goldsmith, Honey Goldstein, Harriet Golish, Helen Gordon, Isaac Heller, Stanley Hirsch, Lillian Jay, Isidore Kabakow, Elaine Kaplan, Evelyn Katcher, Doris Koch, Ben Landro, Mary LeBow, Dr. Harry Levin, Alan Levine, Ira Lewis, Gabriel Marks, Harry Matlin, Robert Meshes, Ruth Mursky, Lou Myers, Samuel Novick, Morton Peachman, Bertha Raff, Albert Rayner, Beatrice Reddick, Jack Rinn, Gertrude Robbins, Mo Robbins, Gerald Robinson, Charles Rosen, Willie Schenkler, Marcia Schnell, Miriam Schnitzer, Saul Schrage, Max Schwartz, Joyce Seltzer, Bernice Scheft, Dennis Silbergeld, Gussie Silberman, Harry Silver, Lou Silverstone, Monroe Sommer, Emmanuel Steer, Esther Stein, Monroe Steiner, Rebecca Tickton, Abe Usherson, Saul Walks, Jeanette Warner, Sylvia Wasser, George Weiss, Sanford Wellen, Juliet Wolin, Michael Zell, Sidney Zilberberg. As well, those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. We rise for the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598 and join together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, Bialman Tivra Pirte Bialik Malchute, B'chayachon Uvyomachon, Ulchayet Uchol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala Vizman Kari V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'elam Omei Omaya. Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitba'ar V'yitramam V'yitnaseh. V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei V'tusha B'richu. Le'elam Mikol B'rachata V'shirata. Tushbachata V'nechamata. Ta'miran Bialma V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya. V'chayim Aleinu V'yalcho Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Romam. Hu Ya'aseh Shalom. Aleinu V'yalcho Yisrael V'imru Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we say, Amen. Our observance of Shabbat continues tomorrow with the Holy Scrollers and the Morning Minyan. Join us for the Tuesday Bible class and on Wednesday, Talmud with Training Wheels with Samara Schwartz. We are honored and excited that Brian Stevenson, acclaimed human rights attorney, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, and author of the New York Times bestseller Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption, adapted for film, which was released in 2019, will speak at Temple Emanu-El and our broader community via a private live-streamed event on March 22nd. Registration is open, so reserve your spot now. And Passover is around the corner, so please keep your eye out for lots of great Passover programming here at Temple Emanu-El. Our closing song tonight is Hatikva on page 678.
Kol balebav pnima, nefesh yehudi homiya, olfatei mizrach kadima, ayin l'tzion Sophia. Od lovda tikvateinu, hatikva shnot alpayim, liotam chofshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion Yerushalayim, liotam chofshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion Yerushalayim.
Final benediction from Rabbi Charles Kroloff.
We are a synagogue blessed to have been able to welcome new Americans, and we look forward to continuing for years to come. And we are a generation greatly blessed to experience Medinat Yisrael, the Jewish state of Israel, reborn and flourishing. To live in this time of Jewish renewal is a blessing not to be taken for granted, never to be taken for granted. One of the foundation stones of Medinat Yisrael is her judicial system. This Shabbat, we celebrate that system and the historic ruling handed down this week. Although limited in scope, this decision recognizes for the first time conversions conducted by Israeli Reform and Conservative rabbis in Israel. We give thanks to the women and men whose Judaism is recognized after more than 15 years of waiting. We give thanks for our progressive movement in Israel, and especially for the Israel Religious Action Center, We give thanks for each and every Jew and human being who works energetically to rebuild the Jewish people. Ashreinu ma tov chelkenu u'ma na'im goralenu. How fortunate are we? How good is our portion? How pleasant is our lot? Amen.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.